Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world. So much love to each and every one of you. I hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing great, thank you very much, and I'm so delighted you've joined me for part 4 of our story tonight. And apparently 2 young children who are staying out at a cabin have found their bicycles being put up in a tree, hanging upside down, and they're wondering what's going on here. And they believe that some other children staying at another cabin have been playing this stunt on them. So let's continue with part 4 of our story tonight. "You hear that?" said my sister. "Someone's laughing at us. I know they are. I bet it's some kids from another cabin playing tricks on us." "You think this is funny?" my sister shouted out. Her voice echoed all over the grove. "Wait until we start playing some tricks on you. I can tell you, you won't be laughing so much when we do." My sister's angry indignance reflected my very sentiments. Neither of us were remotely amused. It wasn't that we couldn't take a joke, of course, but we felt putting our bicycles in the tree like this was going a step too far. Everything in the woodgrove became suddenly extremely quiet. The chuckling subsided, and I had the profound sense that someone was watching us, and whoever they were being decidedly mischievous. I was more than certain that a couple of kids were hiding behind a tree watching us, and having a good old chuckle, and that made me feel as mad as hell. Sooner or later we would get our backs on them. After all, what was good for the goose was good for the gander. If we found out who these kids were, we could play a trick on them ourselves, and they'd be sorry for what they'd done to us. All of a sudden, as if an answer to my suspicions had been received, I noticed a sign leading down a long windy path through the trees with an arrow that indicated that this led to the Hugger Hugger cabin. I automatically remembered the name as one of the many cabins on the list that Julie Holland had given my parents, and Hugger Hugger appeared to be the closest cabin to ours that was being let out to holiday makers. So it made perfect sense to me that the kids playing this trick on us were staying at the Hugger Hugger cabin. "Let's go and check out the Hugger Hugger cabin, shall we?" I said to my sister eagerly. "My guess is the children staying in the cabin are behind the stunt they pulled with our bicycles. Shall we see if we can spot them?" Primrose and I hastily cycled down the long woodland trail through the trees. We could see on a slightly mountainous elevation, at the edge of the woods, was a cabin, almost identical to ours. It was made out of the same distinctive yellow-polished wood. We stood behind a tree, and that was when we saw 3 of the kids that I suspected we might encounter. So all my suspicions were at long last confirmed. There were 3 children, round about our age, all riding around on their mountain bikes, going around the open prairie in circles, chuckling and laughing. I knew at once these children had pulled this stunt on us. There was no shadow of a doubt about this in my mind. They had all laughed at us while we wrestled to get our bikes out of that tree branch. I was suddenly resolutely determined to play them at their own game. Here was one antagonistic question that plagued my mind, though, rather incessantly, like an annoying fly buzzing around a window ledge that I seriously wanted to swat away. How on earth did any of these children have the physical strength to lift up our bicycles and place them into the branches high up in a tree? I didn't concern myself with the intrinsic details of this, because these children, as far as I was concerned, had played a trick on us, and we would soon return the favour. Fair was fair as far as I was concerned, and with a fierce determination in my mind, I was already making plans in my head about how me and Primrose would retaliate. I felt rather like a soldier at war, having found the enemy camp, and now working out a strategic plan to attack them that they didn't see coming for a second, an attack that would invariably wipe them all out. I'd always loved hearing the stories about the military growing up, and in that moment I think I did feel rather like a brave soldier, planning an attack on the enemy camp, which in this case was only 3 children, who I would later discover were completely innocent of this crime that I was accusing them of. But that I didn't know at the time. It was when we got home, me and my sister Primrose began to discuss at great length and detail how we would get even with these 3 kids that were staying at the Hugger Hugger cabin, as by now I had wholeheartedly convinced myself that they were absolutely behind the stunt of putting our bicycles high up in the tree. I wasn't cross with these children, nor interested in becoming their friends. I just wanted to get even with them. But we can't go there during the day to play a trick on them when it's light, Primrose assured me. For a start, they'll see us and catch us red-handed. Maybe we should sneak over there first thing in the morning, when everything has just started to get light, and when people are still sleeping in their beds, and the kids are not using their bicycles. We can drag their bikes from the shed and hide them away in the woods. I don't know how we can put their bicycles in a tree branch like they did to us, but we could stuff them into a bush or something. We can even gather some pebbles and put them on the ground like they did to us, so that they can follow the pebbles that will lead them straight to where they'll find their bicycles. And then once we do what they did to us, we'll have got even with them, don't you think? We can do better than that, I said excitedly. I saw in one of the toolboxes a whole big chunk of yellow ribbon. We could tie ribbons on the trees, and they can follow the ribbons to find their bicycles. That way the kids would know that we knew it was them that had placed our bicycles in the tree branches, and that they hadn't fooled us for a single second. That night when me and my sister returned to our beds, all I could think about were the kids staying at the Hugger Hugger cabin, and their horrified reactions when they discovered their bicycles missing from the shed the following morning. I knew there were 3 children staying at the cabin, and 3 bicycles, but me and Primrose could only remove 2 bicycles from the shed. But that didn't matter at all. We were sending a very distinct message to them. Don't mess with us, and I'm sure they would receive our message loud and clear. They would know we were on to them, and that was all that mattered as far as I was concerned. We would invariably end up having the last laugh at their expense, and this thought thrilled me. Indeed, I was so consumed with getting my back on these kids for the trick they'd played on us, that I failed to tell my sister about the Bigfoot I'd seen on the first day we had arrived at the Treneries. It was still dark when the alarm on my cell phone jolted me wide awake. I sat up with quite a start, caught up in the dark, ambiguous shadows of my bedroom, wondering why I'd been flung out of my sleep so rudely. I then groaned as I remembered why I'd set my alarm so diligently the night before. Suddenly, the insane idea of dragging myself out of bed to go off to the Hugger Hugger cabin at the crack of dawn like this didn't seem like the brightest idea. It seemed a tad pathetic, being dead set on getting even on these children I didn't even know, who had harmlessly played a trick on us that neither me or my sister Primrose had appreciated. We should probably just let it go, I told myself. My sleep had been so deliciously sweet, and I didn't want it cruelly obliterated by having to get up at this ungodly hour of the morning. But now that I was wide awake, I felt restless, so restless, in fact, that sleep eluded me, almost as if something was deliberately poking me and insisting that I was not allowed to go back to sleep. Eventually, with bleary eyes and a bedraggled enthusiasm, I half-heartedly trotted over to my sister's bedroom. I began to shake her sleeping form rather vigorously, which she didn't appreciate at all. She moaned and protested, pulling the bed-sheets over her head and telling me to go away and leave her alone because she was trying to sleep. But the more she pushed me away, the more I shook her. Now that I was wide awake, I didn't want to be alone in my wakefulness. "What is it, Morgan? What do you want? Why don't you just leave me alone? I'm trying to get to sleep," she asked me through sleep-filled eyes. But I think she realized by then I wasn't going anywhere, so she might as well confront her annoying brother. "Remember, we're going to the Hugger Hugger cabin," I explained, "to take the kids' bicycles from their shed, to get even with them," I said to her in earnest. "I know you don't feel like getting up right now, and I don't blame you. But once you do, the grogginess will leave you. I promise you it will. It's still dark out there, but it'll be early morning very soon. We should go now while we can. But you need to be very quiet. We don't want to wake up Mum and Dad, do we?" My sister sat up straight in her bed, wiping the sleep away from her eyes. "I'm not sure this is a good idea, Morgan," she said to me. "Those kids probably didn't mean anything. They were only having a bit of fun at our expense. Let's not do this, shall we? But someone was laughing at us when we wrestled with our bicycles to get them out of the tree. Remember that? Do you really want these kids to get away with what they did to us? It's like letting a bully getting away with calling you a nasty name. We have to stand up to those kids so they know not to mess with us again. The message will be loud and clear, and I know they'll leave us alone. If you let people get away with stuff that they shouldn't do, they'll do it again. It's about putting up boundaries that shouldn't be crossed, don't you think? You're absolutely right, said my sister, who abhorred any kind of bullying. Her eyes widened, and I could see a resolute determination written in them. Those kids can't get away with what they did to us. They were making fun of us. They went far too far putting our bicycles up in the tree branch like that. It made me angry. I actually want them to know that the stunt they pulled on us wasn't funny at all. If we don't do something, they might pull another joke on us. There are 3 of them as opposed to 2 of us, and we are at this cabin for 3 weeks. And who knows what other games they'll play on us if we don't let them know we are on to them, and that we didn't like what they did to our bicycles. By this point, my sister was wide awake. I think together we'd stoked up the dying flames of our resolve to get our backs on the children staying at the Hugger Hugger cabin. Thankfully, my parents were blissfully fast asleep and remained completely oblivious and uninformed about our wayward intentions. Indeed, my parents were so much caught up in each other on this trip that they hadn't been able to get enough of each other, like 2 loved-up teenagers that have found themselves for the very first time. Certainly as a family, we had been enjoying a lot more intimacy together that we'd never fully appreciated, but things were changing significantly. I was beginning to feel a close connection to my father, which had never happened to me before. My father had apologized profusely for shutting me out for so long. "I'm ashamed of myself, son. I really am," he had said. "I've been a very bad father to you, but not any more. There are going to be some substantial changes around here. From now on, I'm not going to be absent in your life any more." He had said much the same to my sister Primrose, and of course to my mother, and I knew he meant every word of what he was saying. Me and my sister gingerly sneaked out of the glass sliding doors of the living room and let ourselves out onto the wraparound porch of the cabin. We glided down the steps clandestinely, our sneakers meeting the soft, damp, dew-laden grass. At this time of the morning we were met with the cheerful trills of the dawn chorus. The sky was grey, but a soft ethereal whisper of light had begun to whirl its way through the darkness, almost as if a dimmer switch was slowly beginning to be turned up ever so slowly. The sky blew out a ribbon of orange, rather like an old man releasing the smoke from his pipe, that blows out a yellow light over the horizon. In a trice, the early morning sunrise mischievously peeped down at us, spread-eagling its radiant glow across the sky. I was stunned by how incredibly prepossessing it was to be up this early in the morning, and an excited thrill ran through my body, like prisms of electricity. It was still fresh out of doors, and the smell of pine lingered in the air. We grabbed our bicycles from the shed and cycled eagerly down the woodland paths through the trees. Our bicycles jolted over the blistered roots and cracks in the ground. The whispers of morning light became significantly brighter with every second that passed, which was a good thing, as it can be extremely intimidating riding through a woodland oasis in the early hours of the morning, especially when the cover from the trees can hijack the first gasps of morning light. Soon we found the sign that led to the Hugger Hugger cabin, and cycled down the undulating paths until the cabin came into view. We propped our bicycles against a tree in the woods that overlooked views of the Hugger Hugger cabin. We made our way very discreetly and stealthily towards the shed, tiptoeing on our sneakers to ensure we made as little noise as possible. The shed was situated a few feet away from the cabin, which we assumed was where the kids' bicycles were obviously stored. It was as we were clandestinely in the process of sneaking towards the shed, I was overcome with an uneasy, disquieted feeling. I was certain that someone was watching us. Indeed, I was so sure of this, that me and my sister were not alone, that chills began to run down my spine. and I could feel that I was breaking out into sweat on my forehead, that had become profoundly wet, and such a bizarre physical reaction had never happened to me before. What if one of the kids' parents was wide awake in the cabin, I thought. Maybe they got up early to make themselves a cup of coffee, and were currently looking out of the window at us. I was sure there was a light coming from the kitchen. Someone could possibly be up. I was certain of this. What if they saw us taking their children's bicycles from the shed? They might possibly think we were stealing them, for they would likely not know we were pulling a harmless stunt on their children, to get our backs on them for the joke that they had pulled on us. But adults sometimes have no clue about such things, and always believe the very worst of other people's children. I could imagine the enraged man of the house coming out of the cabin, waving an indignant, angry fist at us, and asking us what the hell we were doing with his children's bicycles, and to tell us to get the hell away from their cabin, or he'd contact our parents or call the police to ensure that we got ourselves into big trouble. I began to panic as we cautiously made our way towards the shed. "We can't do this," I said abruptly, turning around sharply to look at my sister dead in the eye. "I don't know. It just doesn't feel right. Something feels very wrong about this. I'm having second thoughts about this." I noticed an expression of relief washed over Primrose's face, for it appeared she too was beginning to feel hesitant about this wild endeavour of ours, that now we were acting out in real time, but it didn't feel quite so smooth sailing after all. Suddenly I felt rather foolish. The day before, when we discussed this plan together in our heads, it had gone forward so seamlessly, but in the ethereal light of the early morning, an inner nudge was telling us both not to do this. I knew we needed to listen to that soft inner guiding voice, or we might possibly live to regret it if we didn't. "Let's get out of here," I whispered to my sister earnestly, putting a firm hand on her to chaperone her away from the shed. She nodded, needing little to no encouragement. We turned around and crept back to the woodland oasis, where it was safe to hide out in the ambiguous dark shadows. But once we got back onto the trail, we could not locate our bicycles, for they weren't anywhere to be found. Where were they? I was mystified. I knew we had propped them up behind a tree that overlooked the Hugga Hugga cabin, but they had mysteriously disappeared, as if we were playing a game of déjà vu all over again. At this point we both thought we were losing our minds. There was no way the children from the Hugga Hugga cabin were pulling another stunt on us, because they were likely fast asleep at this point in time. So where were our bicycles, I wondered. All of a sudden my sister pointed to a trail of pebbles on the ground, and we followed them, and sure enough, when we looked up a tree, both our bicycles were hanging upside down in the branches. And then the chuckling erupted all over again, like it had done before, as if someone was taking great delight in watching our baffled reactions. And that was when I knew unequivocally that this little game had not been performed by the innocent kids staying at the Hugga Hugga cabin. So if they weren't doing this to us, then who was? At this point I was feeling incredibly annoyed and very bemused. My skin burnt in frustration, my throat became scratchy and dry, and I felt distinctly nauseous, as if I was about to hurl up the contents of my stomach. I felt like a dog in a cage that had been poked way too many times and was about to snap at the first hand that came my way. I began to look around for who it was that was playing this cruel game on us. "I don't know who you are," I called out, "but this isn't remotely funny. You think it's funny hiding our bicycles up in a tree and watching us trying to get them down. I don't know who you are, but you're not going to get away with this." My sister and I began to search the woods to see if we could find the location of the trickster who was doing this to us, but we couldn't see anyone anywhere. So we returned to the tree, trying to figure out how on earth we were going to get our bicycles down from such a high height. Last time it had been easy enough, but this tree was almost impossible for us to climb. So who the hell had put our bicycles up in the branch like this? As we were pondering all this, and how we were going to bring our bicycles down from that high branch, we could hear a booming male voice. It was sounding much like a father scolding his child, but whoever this man was, his voice was powerfully deep, and he spoke in a strange language I'd never heard before. But his voice immediately demanded respect. I can guarantee if kids were chatting noisily in a classroom, and a voice like that was heard, every child would stop chatting at once and stand up to attention. Primrose looked at me with wide eyes. "There's a voice! A male voice! Who is it?" she whispered. I nodded. We could also hear a chirruping voice. It sounded like that of a child, as if this kid, whoever he was trying to explain away his mischievous, inappropriate behaviour to his father, who wasn't having any of it, for his voice boomed with indignance. That was when we saw him, when he made his presence known to us, which I wholeheartedly believe was intentional. He was holding his child's hand and moving through the trees towards us. He was nimble on his feet. So graceful was his movements that he looked as if he was floating on air. It was the male Bigfoot I'd first seen when I'd arrived at the Treneries. My mouth dropped open into such a wide gape, as so immense was my surprise to see him again. The Bigfoot was more enormous and gargantuan than I could have ever imagined close up and personal. How tall he was I wasn't sure, but at a guess I'd say he was about 10 foot tall. He was solid and robust in his proportions, and every area of his body rippled with muscle. He was covered in long flowing dark hair, and his face was incredibly human. The smaller Bigfoot was probably 5 foot tall, and a lot more lanky than his father, but I imagine over time he would grow just like him, and could possibly end up bigger than his father was. He looked incredibly sheepish and rather guilty, hanging his head in shame, as if he'd been well and truly scolded by his disapproving father, who was not going to put up with his nonsense a moment longer. It was in that moment I was washed in a very clear understanding. All the time we'd falsely believed the 3 kids from the Hugga Hugga cabin had put our bicycles upside down in the tree. But I realized all along it had been this mischievous, sneaky little Bigfoot. Somehow the large male Bigfoot had discovered his son's cheeky little prank that he'd played on us, and he'd been severely reprimanded for his bad behaviour. I realized that this mischievous little Bigfoot was the one that had chuckled at us when we had discovered our bicycles hanging upside down in the tree. At this point in time, when we encountered the Bigfoots, my sister told me later that she'd been so stunned by what she was seeing that her eyes were standing up on stalks, and she was seriously beginning to doubt herself, wondering if she was caught up in some bizarre, very lucid dream. But she knew that this was no trick of the light, no teasing of a wild imagination, that this unquestionably was real. I will say this, after seeing the male Bigfoot from the passenger side window of our car that day, I knew I had nothing to fear, for his kind, reassuring, intelligent, soulful eyes had assured me that he didn't impose a threat. But even so, it was very intimidating, standing close to such powerful-looking creatures. So much so that we felt like a couple of Barbie dolls. I stood there staring up at him and his son as he ambled over towards the tree, and with his powerful hand he brought down our bicycles for us, as if they weighed nothing more than a couple of feathers. Once he'd put them down on the ground and propped them up against a tree, he looked up at us apologetically and spoke to us in his booming voice, in a language we couldn't comprehend, but somehow the conversation became telepathic. His dark treacle-coloured eyes met mine. I heard him say in my head, "Makila swana, he ka safatwa, ponsoki shaka. It's you again. I hope you don't doubt that I'm real now. I knew when I saw you a few days back I'd see you again, and here we are. Our paths have crossed. I must apologize for my son's little games that he's been playing on you. He's a troublemaker, always has been. Loves playing tricks on his mother and sister. I keep reprimanding him for his bad behaviour, but he never listens." He turned around to look at his son, who began to chatter away to us, with a mischievous glint in his eyes. It was almost as if you could feel and touch his naughtiness in your hand, as if it was a solemn item you could actually feel. But there was nothing insidious about this little Bigfoot's intentions or motives. It was poignantly clear to me. The little Bigfoot had thoroughly enjoyed our nonplussed, rather bemused reactions when we discovered, to our horror, our bicycles tangled up in a tree branch hanging upside down. And looking at it from his perspective, as the trickster playing a clever prank on two bewildered kids, I guess he'd found our befuddled expressions hilariously funny. And probably in the same circumstances, I'd likely have done so too. I was in no doubt that this juvenile Bigfoot, who was not little by any manner of means, was likely a bustling ball of lively energy that caused his parents no end of problems, getting up to all kinds of naughty little pranks. The male Bigfoot spoke to me again in my head, in this unorthodox telepathic exchange, and said, Pelassequa, Kilasi, Motsonasa. He says he's sorry, but I think he's trying to appease me on that one, I do. But if the truth be told, I'm not sure my son is sorry about anything he does, because he keeps getting up to these tricks. What he did to you with your things over there, he said, pointing up at the tree, it was very, very naughty of him. He shouldn't have put them in the tree beyond your reach. Once again, I apologize for his behavior. He turned around and said something to his son, in a booming, no-nonsense tone of voice that made the little Bigfoot stand up to attention. His slouched shoulders immediately straightened, and he met his father's steely gaze, and said something in a language that I couldn't understand. But if I was to wage a guess, he was saying, "Don't do this again. Do you understand me?" The juvenile Bigfoot nodded to his dad obediently, cast us an amused look, as if he was still remembering how me and my sister reacted when we'd stared up in the tree branch in horror to see our bicycles dangling upside down, that looked like mangled, lopsided Christmas decorations, to say the very least. We watched the Bigfoots glide away so gracefully until they were gone from our sight as they disappeared through the trees, and I was genuinely sorry to see them go. The short time we'd spent in their company, I had felt swaddled by a warm, genuinely kind energy. My sister Primrose was beside herself with excitement after the Bigfoots had gone. Her eyes shone so brightly they were almost blinding, and she bounced around the place ebulliently, like Tigger from Winnie the Pooh. "We saw 2 Bigfoots!" she cried out. "All the time the little Bigfoot was playing tricks on us with our bicycles, Morgan, and the male Bigfoot retrieved our bicycles for us. Good job he did, as how would we have been able to explain that to Mum and Dad, how our bicycles ended up on the top of a tree? They'd never ever believe our story. They'd think we were making it up. Isn't it funny? Only the other day when we were driving to the Treneries, you happened to ask Mum and Dad if this was Bigfoot country. Mum was horrified at your suggestion. She sniggered at the very idea that Bigfoots could exist. She said it was all made up, fictitious fairy tales. But we saw them, Morgan, didn't we? And they were real. They were definitely real." "We both did see the Bigfoots," I told my sister. "But I've seen the large male Bigfoot before. I saw him when we first arrived in the Treneries in our car. He communicated with me telepathically, like he did just now. But he said to me, 'Yes, I'm real, and good day to you.'" "You what?" asked Primrose, looking confounded. "Why on earth didn't you tell me this, Morgan? You know I would have believed you. I'm not as cynical as Mum and Dad are. We share everything together. Why would you keep such a secret from me?" "It's not that I deliberately did it," I said. "I was going to tell you about it. But when I thought those kids had put our bicycles upside down in the tree, I was so mad with them, so determined to get even with them, I clean forgot about the Bigfoot." "I want to tell Mum and Dad what we saw," said Primrose, her eyes twinkling brightly. "They will believe us if we back each other's stories up, don't you think? Oh, come on, Morgan. Stop pulling a face at me. Stop looking so doubtful. Why can't we tell them what we saw?" "I don't think we should tell Mum or Dad about all of this," I advised my sister. "Besides, they don't even know we left the cabin at the crack of dawn this morning, do they? If they discovered we slipped out, they won't be best amused. There are some things best not mentioning." The truth was, I knew Primrose and her wild, bubbly, unbridled personality at the very best of times, that she'd be bursting to tell Mum and Dad what she'd seen, and there would be no way I could stop her. But I knew how frustrated she would become if my parents refused to believe a word of our story. So I braced myself for what was to come, knowing that it would be far from pleasant to meet up with my parents' scepticism. Amy, where were the children, I wondered, feeling annoyed, as I searched the cabin for them, only to find that their bedrooms were empty and both their beds left unmade. I hadn't told them that they could leave the cabin early, so it didn't rest well with me that they hadn't even bothered to ask me for permission to go out on their own. It was naughty of them to just bog off like this, but then I told myself it was their school holidays after all, and I shouldn't be too hard on our children. I suspected that they had taken their bikes down the mountain trail through the trees. My husband entered the kitchen, and I could smell the musky fragrance of his aftershave. He swaddled me in a warm hug. I had Julie Holland to thank for the restoration of my marriage, which, like a house that had been falling apart, had been miraculously restored and brought back to life. Walter was back to being the man he was when I first married him, and lately it would seem we couldn't get enough of each other, almost as if we were making up for lost time. And somewhere deep down inside my gut, I knew there was no going back for Walter. Gone were the tireless days where he'd lock himself away in his office for hours on end. He told me the emptiness in him had been filled. "I'd been such a fool," he told me. "All the time I didn't realize that if I made time for you and the children, spent more time in nature, in quiet meditation, and getting some much-needed exercise, I would begin to find meaning and purpose in my life again, which I definitely have. I am a new man, love," he told me. "Never again am I going to put work before you and the children. I've been an idiot, and goodness knows why you've put up with me for so very long." I affectionately stroked the dimple on my husband's cheek and said to him, "Look at you." I was admiring how there was a glow to his face and a bounce to his step. "Yes, you were a fool. I admit that. But I never lost faith that I'd get you back sooner or later. My mother told me to kick you to the curb a long time ago, but I refused to listen to her. I wasn't having any of it, because I can't help myself. I love the bones of you, Walter. Well then, what can I say? I'm a very lucky man indeed, to have such a long-suffering wife who's put up with me for so long. I must have done something rather good in a previous life, I think." "You surely are lucky to have me," I teased my husband, giving him a naughty wink. I'd been thrilled to see how my children were now interacting with their father, so I knew coming here to the Treneries really had been one of the best things we could possibly have done. The cabin, with its magnificent prepossessing views over the mountains, had quite literally taken my breath away, and enjoying this time together as a family had been priceless. But my husband assured me that there were many more family holidays to come, and I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt this happy. I had contacted my mother recently to tell her about the turnaround in my husband's behaviour, but of course she wasn't buying any of it. "I hate to say this to you, Amy, but I honestly don't think that Walter's behaviour will last," she said dismissively. "He may have changed his tune for a short while, but he'll be back to his old ways before you can say Jack Robinson. I hate to tell you this, love, but a leopard never changes its spots." "I don't think so, Mum," I had said resolutely. "I really believe that Walter has changed for the good. We've become a close family again, and Walter's spending so much quality time with the children." My mother's cynicism really got me down, because she had said, "Well, I won't believe it until I see it with my own eyes." After Walter had embraced me in a long hug, he suddenly turned around in a bemusement, as if something was missing, and looked around the kitchen. "Where are the kids? I thought the cabin seemed unusually quiet this morning." "The kids have sneaked off," I said. "They probably went off for a bicycle ride in the woods, if I know them. I so wish they'd ask me before going off on their own like this. Morgan is old enough to know better. Honestly, it's quite naughty of him, really." My husband ran his hand through his hair and said, "Let them be kids, love.
This is the first family holiday we've enjoyed together for a long time. So let's give them some freedom, shall we?"
Before long I was busying myself making breakfast over the range, and I glanced out of the window to see my 2 children riding their bicycles through the woods. I stood there for a second and watched my children's excited faces as they got off their bicycles and placed them in the shed. They both looked incredibly happy, and it confirmed to me how important the holidays were for the kids. Moments later, Primrose burst into the kitchen, her eyes dancing with enthusiasm. "You'll never believe it, Mum! You'll never believe it!" she said excitedly, as if there was something she just couldn't wait to get off her chest.
"Whatever it is, Primrose, I'm sure it can wait," I told her. "The 2 of you must be extremely hungry. I've made bacon and eggs for breakfast."
My daughter bit her lip awkwardly, as if she desperately wanted to say something, but had decided better against it. She sat down at the kitchen table, where we enjoyed breakfast together as a family. But while I sat there, I could see my daughter was making a poor showing of her meal, as if she'd lost her appetite. It looked as if she couldn't wait to say something. I took a swig of my orange juice and put it down on the table, and then said,
"Out with it, Primrose. What is it you're bursting to tell me?"
Primrose began to tell us her incredulous story of the little Bigfoot putting their bicycles in the tree, and then a male Bigfoot retrieving the bicycles for them and apologizing for his son's naughty behavior.
"Is that so, Primrose? What a very interesting story," I said, glancing at my husband as if to say that I thought that Primrose was away with the fairies, and I genuinely thought she was. When I did this, my son Morgan became incredibly angry. He rose to his feet, pushing his chair away from the table. He became extremely defensive. His nostrils flared. His eyes grew round with indignance.
"What's wrong with you, Mum? Why are you so cynical? I told Primrose not to tell you or Dad what happened, because I knew you'd both be so condescending about this. We aren't making the story up, but it's wasted on you. You don't believe a word of it anyway, do you?" I suddenly was hit with huge pangs of shame, because I was behaving exactly like my mother was to me. My mother didn't have any faith that my relationship with Walter was better than ever before, just like I didn't have any faith that my children were telling me the truth. I reminded myself that my children had never been inclined to make up stories like this, so I apologized to them and told them I believed them. But I have to say I was still dealing with wavering doubts, until one night in the kitchen, as I was washing some dishes up in the sink, I nearly had a heart attack when I saw a face staring in at me curiously through the kitchen window, with eyes that gave off a bright yellow eyeshine. The creature looked right in at me, and I realized it was a juvenile Bigfoot. It didn't seem remotely interested in me. It was looking out for my children, and seemed almost disappointed to see me at the window. I heard in my head the words, "Where are they?" The little Bigfoot then just vanished, and I was hit with the reality of what I had just observed. Never again would I adopt such a cynical outlook towards my kids. For all this time they had been telling the absolute truth, when I had foolishly doubted them based on my ignorant perception of the world. My kids had 3 more experiences with the little Bigfoot, hiding their bike up in the trees at the Treneries. So that little thing, despite being told off by his father on numerous occasions, was not inclined to listen. The trip to the Treneries was the beginning of many wonderful holidays for my family. I have truly to thank Julie Holland for enabling me and my husband to find meaning in our lives. My mother was left eating her words, because she could see that Walter had become the family man I had always hoped he would become, and more besides. These days Walter has so many keen interests, and I'm glad to say his work is no longer a priority in his life. Family for him is absolutely everything, and we always come first in his life. I think my trip to the Treneries enabled me to realize that there is so much more to this world than we can ever imagine, and that Bigfoot is unquestionably real. Never again will I be so quick to doubt. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.